All right. Welcome to the Online Network of Independent Learning Professionals presentation on scenario mapping documents. I am Patti Bryant, and we're going to be talking about creating realistic scenarios today. So a little bit about my company. I have a company called Learning Reinvented, and I mostly do storyboarding. So that's really where my wheelhouse is, although I can do storyline, and I help, do narration and things like that. But my sweet spot, all of us have our strengths, is really storyboarding. So I spend a lot of time taking flat content and figuring out how to turn that into scenarios. And I work with a lot of subject matter experts. And so scenario mapping documents are something that I created out of some certain situations that happen with subject matter experts. So on our agenda, we're going to talk about when a scenario mapping document is helpful, so when you should use it, when you should not use it. It's not always helpful. There's better ways of doing it if you're in if your situation is a little bit different. The 4 types of base questions that I always use in a scenario mapping document, and then I'll walk you through 3 scenarios. I'll do the first 2 myself and just kind of walk you through how I apply the base questions, and then the 3rd scenario we'll do together. So it should be fun. So a scenario mapping document is useful when the subject matter expert is unavailable by phone. I work with a lot of agencies, and so sometimes the subject matter experts, I have very limited time with them, if any time at all. And also sometimes the deadlines are so very aggressive that on projects that I work on, that there's, no time to even schedule a call. I mean, if I'm going to, create a storyboard and I need it done in like 3 days, and the subject matter expert isn't available during that 3-day time frame, that kind of knocks it out of, me being able to get the information I need on the phone. You're working through an agency and have limited SME time, so that's one I just mentioned. Sometimes I run across subject matter experts that don't work well on the spot. So like I'll get on the phone and start trying to do some action mapping with them, which is Kathy Moore's, methodology of making sure that courses are actionable. And I start trying to get into creating realistic scenarios, and they aren't able to articulate. They need some time to just sit with the questions and really think through them. I actually work a little bit more that way as well. Sometimes you run out of time with a subject matter expert. I don't know if anybody has ever had this happen, but sometimes I get on kickoff calls, which people also want to go over so many other things, and then at the end they leave the instructional designer 15 minutes for asking subject matter expert questions after they through the whole project plan and the timeline and how they work and all that kind of stuff. And so I run out of time because I only have time to ask one question. And that's fun. And also the other caveat with these types of documents is it's really hard to do a scenario mapping document when there's complex branching. So I don't know if Christy's on the line today, but Christy does a lot of complex branching. This would not work for when someone is going to need to do multiple, if they select this and that happens, and then it goes into this rabbit hole, and that's not what we're doing here. It's just simple scenarios for making sure they're realistic. And what I'll say is, if none of these situations apply, then don't use a scenario mapping document. If you can get on the phone with the subject matter expert and really talk through some scenarios, that's just always the best way, because things come up, you can ask questions, you can brainstorm with them, and the end result's often a lot better. So this is kind of like use in a pinch. So the 4 base questions, this was really interesting when I was creating this presentation, because I have done scenario mapping documents for so long that I didn't even realize there was any methodology to what I was doing. So I had to actually look at all of the documents I've done in the past and figure out how I even created them. So I distilled it down to 4 base questions. The first one is optional. It is about the actual scenario. So it's what context do you need to create a scenario, and it must be tied to a learning objective. So this is how you make sure that you're not creating scenarios that don't actually tie back to any of the core learning objectives in your course. That keeps the content really focused. And I have, in the beginning, just like a beginner's mistake, just tried to come up with scenarios, and I didn't tie them to learning objectives. And then what happens is you read through the storyboard and it doesn't really accomplish anything. It's just scenarios for scenario's sake. So that's why you need the learning objectives first. So that's the first base question. And if you have any questions as I go through this, again, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. The second question, question 2, is the correct response. So what is the right action for the learner to take in the situation? Yeah, and so I will definitely provide a copy of these slides just so folks know. I'm also going to provide a scenario mapping document that's already been completed on Slack when we're done here. So that way you can download that and use it too, just so everybody knows. Question 3 is going to be your realistic distractors. So what are the wrong actions that the learner could take? And question 4 is going to be the realistic consequences. So for each wrong action, what would be the result? And that helps us get out of that, you know, where you create a scenario and it's going really well, and then you get to the end and you're just like, incorrect or correct. We don't want to see that. You know, we want to see, you know, you lost the account, or you got fired, or like there's got to be some kind of realistic consequence. Okay, so our first scenario, and this is a real one that I ran into this year. So you're creating an auditing course, and you've determined one of the learning objectives is to visually assess an audit. So like in this scenario, I got a PowerPoint that had like 200 slides, and it was all about auditing. And it was, when I got done with the 200 slides, I still could not understand, like, what are they auditing? What kind of environment is this in? I mean, visually assess an audit. What does that even look like? Like, what is the person, you know, looking at, like some kind of material? What is it? I don't know. Because a lot of what I get, and probably what you get, is just high level information on procedures, and there's nothing that really ties it to any context. So this scenario mapping document is like what helped me walk the subject matter expert through an audit step by step to gather the realistic context and then create the scenario. So let's go through this one. So question 1, this is, again, remember scenario is our question 1. So what context do we need to create the scenario? Our learning objective is that learners need to be able to visually assess an audit. So our question 1 might be something like, in what situation might an auditor be tempted to not visually assess an audit? Another, you know, type of question that we might use here is, you know, what kind of setting is this in? Is it an office? Is it a factory? Is it a cube farm? Or I might ask also character imagery questions for this question 1. So like, what ethnicity might this person be? What age range? What gender? You know, the point of this question 1 is to get to a place to start and adding context. So sometimes I don't need this. Sometimes the subject matter expert or the content that I've received has already given me enough context. So this is just if you need a little bit more information about, like, what is the background going to look like? What is our character? And then in this case, you know, just a little bit more information to clarify here. And again, we're going to go through several scenarios, several rounds of this. So if that doesn't make sense to you just yet, that's okay. Question 2 is, what is the right action for the learner to take? So this is our second question. It could be something like, what should the auditor do in this situation? So we've got some type of situation where the auditor might be tempted not to do this, and what should they do in this situation? Question 3, really simple. What are the wrong actions? So again, what wrong actions might the auditor take in this situation? It's really very simple, you know, kind of as you walk through these questions, but I have found that when I get this information back from the SMEs, it makes for such an incredible, realistic experience for the learner. Question 4, for each wrong action, what would be the result? So this is our realistic consequences. So this one, for each wrong action, what would be a result of the action? So this gives me a really good, you know, baseline to work with. Once the subject matter expert answers these questions, I can then create something very realistic out of that. Any questions so far? We're going to go through another example in a second.
So Patti, do you usually, hi.
Hi.
Just for everybody's edification, you usually give them these, this table and ask them to fill in the answer, correct?
That is correct, yes. And I will give them this. So if I know that I have a project starting, like, what are we at? We're at Thursday. Let's say I know I'm going to start storyboarding on Monday, and I've gotten the content today. I always ask for the content early because I need to do a bit of a content review to make sure that we're not missing anything or whatever. I will do a high-level run-through of the learning objectives and pull out these things because it's really high level. You don't have to know a lot about the content to ask these questions. We know our learning objective is visually assess the content and audit. In my mind, I don't know what kind of situation, why wouldn't they do it? And then the other questions are pretty generic. And so I will send that to them, you know, today and ask them over the next couple of days. And then by the time I start storyboarding on Monday, I've got a whole list of things that I can work with.
So Patti,
yes, let's see who we had. Go
John.
ahead. Is that Alexander? John? Okay, perfect, John.
So you started, they gave you 200 slides that were all addressed at this one learning objective.
No. That's a good clarification, John. They gave me 200 slides, and what I'm doing is I'm taking you through one learning objective that was in this 200 because I don't want to overwhelm you and go through like every single learning objective. That's a great distinguisher. Yes. Thanks for that. Elizabeth?
I have 2 questions. So this might be reflective of the agreement or the relationship and expectations you have with the client. Was your goal to create scenarios for each learning objective in those 200 slides, or was that sort of part of your agreement with the client?
So no, my goal wasn't to create a scenario for every single learning objective, but what I needed to do, there were certain learning objectives that, that were actionable that I decided what I wanted to have is an auditor come in to an audit, and then I looked at the learning objectives and I said, okay, all these things within an audit, these are the things that I could create a scenario. So I can have my character, you know, walk in the door, who do they talk to first? Now they're getting interrupted and now this is happening. So all these learning objectives, while they're in some type of, on the audit, that's what I was creating scenarios for. There were other learning objectives that were more like, prepare for an audit successfully. And so, that one I did a little bit more high level information, like here's a checklist. So I do kind of focus the scenarios into what I just feel would lend itself best for that.
And how did you prepare the client ahead of time for how you might expect for them to answer these questions, or even set expectations on how much time it might take? I find, sometimes if it really is a subject matter expert, like a real one, you would think that they would be able to come up with quick answers to these consequences and like really be able to hit on those. I just wanted to know if you found that, your subject matter experts, like they were prepared and really able to do this in sort of an efficient manner.
Yeah. So, that's a crapshoot. Some of the subject matter experts, for instance, the ones that I spoke about who I would get on a call, what would happen with them is they would kind of start going in all these different directions. And so the reason, it's not that they couldn't come up with answers on the spot, but more so that they couldn't be succinct. And so we didn't have enough time for the call. So if our call is 30 minutes and they start, I've got like 5 learning objectives that I've got to get through, we get through 2. And so I guess that's a really good point. It's not that they can't get through, like, here's the answers. It's more so that there wasn't enough time because they, subject matter experts wants to tell you everything that's in their head. And so it just takes too much time. As far as if I'm sending this over in advance and setting expectations, what I will often do is say, it depends on how many learning objectives we have. Sometimes and also the content. Sometimes the content they sent over, I only need, say them to answer like 8 questions. So I'll just send that over and I don't really put a time expectation. I just say, can I get this by, next week? If it's a longer one, then I will say, this is probably going to take someone about an hour. So you let me know when you can get this back, but I can't start storyboarding until I receive this. So I'll usually just make storyboarding contingent upon the completion of this document, because it helps me. This document really, they provide so much information usually in something like this, way more than you would actually need oftentimes. But it helps you really shift the entirety of the course to be more realistic, because sometimes they'll put something in the answer that doesn't really belong with the scenario, but it's like, oh my gosh, like I get this so much better now, so I can write some of the high level information in a much more succinct way. So I often will just say, me storyboarding is contingent upon receipt of this. And if it pushes the timeline out, that's really up to them.
Thank you.
So, yeah, those are great questions.
And can I just say, Patti, what I love about this is that it's kind of funny, because as you go through, so many of us come to instructional design from someplace else. And yet we have an instinct for it. And I remember designing a compliance course on insider trading, and it did all these things, but I just did it. I didn't storyboard it. I didn't plan it out. I just did it. And I would tell these scenarios of what people did and some of them did it right and some of them did it wrong. And then there was an insider trading jail, and it was all using sort of animated characters.
Oh.
And so that's what I love about this, is that you've done such an amazing job of taking what is instinctual to many of us and you've broken it down in a way that we can explain to our clients what it is we need from them. Kudos.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. Yeah, like I said in the beginning, even I myself had no idea, and I do these. I mean, every week I do these, and I thought it'd be cool to talk about this, but then I thought I don't even know how to talk about this, because I just do it. So anyway, it's a good learning experience for me about, you know, why this method works repeatedly. So thanks for that. All right, we're at our second scenario, second out of 3. This one is a little bit different. So this one, we're creating a sales course. We've determined that one of the learning objectives is to adapt behavior to the customer's communication style. I'm gonna go to that. So let's see what that would look like. So question 1, this is our scenario. For adapting a behavior to the customer's communication style, which I have done so many of these type of courses, I don't know if you guys have, but the questions that I might ask for question 1 is, who is this customer? And so that's where I might expand a little bit. I might ask, you know, what ethnicity are they? What is their age range? What are their gender? Because certain companies have customers of a certain age range. So if any of that applies, I might ask, like, what are they coming to the store to buy? So anything that I need that I don't have in the content, that's the kind of stuff I'm going to put in here. And then, you know, what are they working on, if that applies. So really just thinking of those kind of questions that if you're looking at a PowerPoint slide or your storyline slide or whatever scene that you're creating and whatever software you're using, what do you need to be able to put on screen? You know, sometimes it's even like, what does the background look like? And then you realize when you send it to the subject matter expert that you don't have, they want a certain type of office environment. You don't even have the imagery to use. So anyway, scenario. Question 2, so this is our correct response about adapting behavior to the customer's communication style. So question 2 is just, what's the best way to begin a conversation with the customer? This type of thing would help you start the scenario. So you may have like 2 rounds of this. You may have, what is the best way to start a conversation with the customer? And then the right answer and the wrong answer, and then the realistic distractor. And then you may do one more row and say, you know, like, how should you continue the conversation? You know, so there's a little bit of play that you've got in this. I'm just kind of giving you the framework. Question 3 are our realistic distractors. So these are all the wrong actions. So this one might be something like, what would be an ineffective way to begin a conversation with the customer? So starting off on the wrong foot. And question 4 is our realistic consequence. What would be the result? So here we have, how would the customer respond to each ineffective way of beginning a conversation? So this will get you a start of a conversation with a customer, a little bit of background history, what happens, the ways that you might start it wrong, like maybe you know, the subject matter expert might write in here, you know, asking a yes or no question instead of using open-ended, you know, that's kind of a sales thing. And then what would the customer, how would they respond to each ineffective way of beginning? That would give you some real, like, customer, how they have seen customers react to each of those wrong ways of dealing with them. So that really gives you a very solid core to start creating your scenarios from. Marianne, that's a good question. Marianne asked if I have a cheat sheet. And I am going to give you, in just a second, we're going to go through a scenario together. So we're going to work on one together. And okay. I'm going to post in Slack a completed one, a completed scenario mapping document. So then you can just, like, you know, manipulate it however you want. And then I'm going to put these slides up too. So that's a good question. All right. Scenario 3. So this one is the one that we're going to do together. And we're creating a course for facilitators to help them effectively facilitate a mindful mornings session. So mindful mornings is a book series that I have. And the idea behind it is that you sit in a group of people and there is a facilitator, and the facilitator is facilitating the conversation. So what we're doing is creating a course for these facilitators, because they need to know how to do certain things, like if people start talking over each other in this meeting, or if they start, if nobody will say anything, how can you prompt discussion? So this is our hypothetical scenario that I've created for us to do together. So our first step is, and let me make this bigger. Our first step is to put in our learning objectives. So this is kind of what the format of the learning objective or the scenario mapping document looks like. Make it a little bit bigger. So the first thing I do is I put in my learning objectives here, and I will often, this one doesn't have it, but if I'm going to send this to a subject matter expert, which I am, I'm going to put some instructions in here. I'm going to put like note, you know, complete the last column, labeled answers. So that I should have put that in here, but something like that. Anyway, some kind of note to direct them what to do once they open this up. Even if you tell them when you send it over in an email, the note should be in this document, and that is from experience. So we've got our learning objectives that I have put in here. Let me see, 1 second. We've got our learning objectives that I put in here. This is really for me, this column, the learning objective column. It's really up to you. Once we fill this thing out, you could delete this column so that your subject matter experts do not see it. I actually have never sent one out with the learning objectives in it because I don't want to get people confused. But that could be some kind of experiment. You know, it might actually be helpful to subject matter experts to see how each of these questions tie to a learning objective. I'm just letting you know that I typically take them out. All right. So we're going to work on this one. Create an environment where people feel seen and heard. That's the one that we're going to work on together. And so the first question, question 1, is our scenario question. So can anybody think of some question that they might start this off with that is something related to the scenario? Any ideas at all?
This is Kendra. What about what is the topic of your mindful morning?
Yeah, that could be a great one, because when we're creating the scenario, if we want to make this really realistic, we might want to know the topic of this mindful morning, because we might have voiceover saying something like, today we're going to talk about blah, blah, blah. So let me put that one in. Any other ideas? And remember this one, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering if we should ask what makes a safe environment, safe and, you know, open environment.
Yeah, that is a great one. So
is that another question, or is that the next level, perhaps? I don't know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that, let me actually flip back to our, so we have it like our little snippet here. So that is going to be our question 2 in a second.
All right.
Because that is the correct response. So actually, let's go ahead and fill that one in, because we don't have to do this in any certain order. So it would be something like, what are some things a facilitator can do to create a safe environment where people feel heard? I feel like you're just helping us move right along, so that's good.
Hey, Patty, this is Kendra again. Yeah. I'd also like to know how many people are going to be in the meeting.
That's a great question. Oh my gosh. And one of the reasons why this question is so great is because think about when we're looking at this on screen, when we're designing it, or if we're not developing it, that's fine. But if we're storyboarding, we have to say people are sitting in some kind of room. How many people are there? You know, like what, you know, thinking about those visuals. So that's a great one.
I'd like to know the type of room, perhaps. I don't know. There's certain arrangements that are more conducive to conversation than others.
Oh my gosh, that is
like a
actually
circular table, or
yes.
something like that.
Would that go above in the first learning objective?
Yes, it's question 1. Oh, determine where and when. You know what? That probably would go up there. But since we're just focusing on this one, it's okay because to put it here, because we're really thinking of how that is also a part of how we create an environment. So it really doesn't matter whether we put this here or here. We just need to put it in once somewhere so we get the answer from the subject matter expert, so that when we're writing this, we know in our head what kind of room this is in. Are they sitting around a circular table? Are they in a conference room? Are they in a break room? Are they out in the open in their cubes? That's important to know. Yeah. How is the room set up is another one that folks alluded to.
What about, is this mandatory or voluntary?
Yeah, we could have that. Is this, and the thing about this question 1 is that you can ask all the questions that come to your mind here. It doesn't matter if you're going to end up using it. Put in the things that you think of, because you may decide to use it. If you don't decide to use it, there was no harm in at least asking, because no matter what, you're continuing to gain context about, this question, is this mandatory or voluntary? I can't think of a way on screen that this would matter, but this could come out softly in a conversation. Like if it's mandatory, somebody might say something like, I don't even understand why we're here. Like I don't feel heard because, they didn't listen, that I don't want to come, so I can play around with some of that stuff. So I'm just saying, don't hold back on the type of questions when you're at this scenario part if you don't have context. So
Patti, do you have to finally land on one question or not? I mean,
right. Yeah.
We have like 4 or 5 questions here.
For this question 1, I will often have 3 or 4 questions in there.
Okay.
I will often have, what is the character, what does the character look like? Tell me a little bit about them. So their age range, their ethnicity, where are they standing? If it's the auditing one, is this in a warehouse? Is this in an office? I don't know. So I will often have 3 or 4 in that first question 1.
Great, thanks.
These others, question 2, question 3, and question 4, you're only typically going to have one thing in those. So this question 1 is a little bit different because it's setting up a lot of context for the scenario. So you'll often have more questions in that, whereas these others will typically just be like, what is the right action? What is the wrong? That kind of thing.
Do you also find that sometimes you get answers back that you can't use in this particular section, but they're relevant somewhere down the line?
100,000%.
Woo!
That's the right answer. Yeah, you win. Your prize is being right. Yeah. So I think that's the cool thing, is that what you're really also doing, in addition to getting the realistic information that you need, you're helping the subject matter expert think through the process. Susie said this, then this happened, then that happened. So sometimes they will put random things in here, and I will encourage them to do that, because I would rather have too much information and then whittle it down, then not enough. Because like you said, oftentimes, like, oh, this doesn't fit here, but it fits there, and that's just fine. It doesn't have to go in a certain, order. So I feel like we have really nailed this question 1. We have gotten lots of good information about, what the room might look like, how many people are sitting around, what the topic is. So I feel good about this one. Question 2 is exactly what it should be. So what are some things a facilitator can do to create a safe environment where people feel heard? That's all we're going to put there, because remember, we're tying it to this learning objective, and that's the only thing we can really ask here are basically, what are the things? Now, you're going to get a few things when the subject matter expert answers this question, but we are only having this one question. So question 3, remember, what are the wrong actions? So what might this one say? It's really the inverse of question 2.
What about something like, what are the elements of the environment, or what can a facilitator do to make people not feel heard, and what can they do to not feel safe? And I almost feel like that's 2 parts of that.
Yeah.
Safe and feeling heard is 2 different things.
Yeah.
In my mind.
Yep.
You might also add, how do we bridge the gap between safety and risk? And that goes to that's another way of asking the same question. So safety is I feel safe doing this, and risk is I'm getting out of my comfort zone. I'm being encouraged and I feel safe enough to get out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of another way of asking the same thing.
Yeah, I really like that. So we could get a little bit more granular. For our purposes here, I'll just, break it out, like what are some things that facilitator might do to inadvertently create an environment that doesn't feel safe, or that doesn't make people feel heard. But the goal is just the inverse of question 2. Instead of what are they doing to do it, what are they doing to cause the issue? Great. That's all we're going to do there. And then question 4 is our realistic consequences. So this is about the result for each wrong action. So if our wrong actions are like, the facilitator makes the environment not feel safe and people not feel heard, what might question 4 be? What might we put there?
What about what do people do if they don't feel safe in these discussions?
Exactly. Yeah, like how would folks respond to each wrong action listed above? What would they do? So like if our subject matter expert says something like, the facilitator comes in and they're like, all right, we got 15 minutes, hurry up, how would folks respond, So that's exactly what it should be. So for that one learning objective, we have completed all 4 of our base questions. And so what I'm going to do now is pop up what it might look like when we get this filled out. So, at this point, obviously we would fill in these others if we had questions for them to answer. But then when we send it off, I'm going to show you kind of what it would look like when we get it back. Yeah, I think it's this one. Okay, so here we are. create an environment. Here we are. Okay, so if we ask, like in my example here, I went with like what type of room might participants be sitting in, but like I said, all the other questions we asked are great too. But this is, we have an enclosed room, such as a conference room, ensure that they're sitting in a circle. So now we know when we're picking graphics that this needs to be a conference room graphic. It needs to have a wall to look enclosed if possible, and people are going to be sitting in a circle. Somebody else had said, like, how many people are there? And that's also very necessary. I wouldn't get everything that I need if I just use this one question as we're talking through this, because I need to know how many people are sitting in there. So, so that was a good point. Oh, goodness. Let's see. I'm going to mute again. I think we got, all right. So then what are some things, this is our question 2, what are some things facilitators can do to create an environment where people feel safe and heard? That's really similar to what we came up with together. So our subject matter expert might say something like, if someone is interrupting others, the facilitator might say, oh, wait a minute, Jeff, let's allow Buzz to finish his thought. But then I want to really hear what your thought is, so hold on to it for a moment. So that gives us a little bit to work with on if somebody's interrupting, what the verbiage might be. You'll sometimes get subject matter experts that will actually write out some of the script for you because they are around it so often and it just intuitively comes to them. Sometimes you'll just get, they'll make sure if people are interrupting others that they take turns, and so then you can use at least your imagination a little bit there, or ask, further. This is why, it's better to have those brainstorming calls. But again, back to this is when we're in a pinch. Our third question is, what might they do to make it an environment where people don't feel safe or heard? So here we've got, if someone is interrupting others, tell them to wait their turn. Or if someone is interrupting others, just don't do anything during the conversation, but speak to them afterward. So this gives us a couple of wrong answers here. How would folks, this is question 4, our distractor, our realistic consequences. So how would folks respond to each wrong action listed above? Okay, so we have somebody interrupting. If you tell the person to wait their turn, they may stop sharing altogether and potentially just stop coming due to feeling judged. So that is a great scenario that we can pull through, and I'll show you in a second kind of what this ended up looking like once I designed it. And then for this other one, we've got, this is where they don't do anything. So if you don't do anything, the person might just keep interrupting, and then people just slowly stop sharing. It really just shuts down the whole meeting. So that gives us some really tangible stuff to work with as we go into the storyboarding phase and then ultimately design this. So let's take a look real fast. Oh, it's hard to see. It's hard to see this, but so we've got our room. So we were able to pick the right type of room. If we went with the person's suggestion from earlier, we would have the right amount of people. And then this is a scenario, it says, what will you do? This is when somebody interrupted. So you're missing some of the context here because there's voiceover and two of the little participants interrupt each other. And so now it's asking, what will you do? And based on just the information out of the scenario mapping document, I was able to write, nothing now, but speak with Jeff after the discussion. Jeff is the person who's interrupting. Or we could say, oh, wait a minute, Jeff, let's allow Sarah to finish her thought, but then I really want to hear your thought, so hold on. So this is our right answer, remember, from the scenario mapping document. Or we might say, Jeff, please wait your turn. So these were our 2 wrong answers from the subject matter expert and the 1 right answer. So if we select Jeff, wait your turn, we got that over here. Jeff stops talking. He doesn't show up the next day. You've crushed his little spirit. And so that came from the scenario mapping document of our realistic consequence of what happened. And so this is, you know, one that's my own, just since for proprietary reasons, I can't obviously show you what I've done with actual clients. But this really shows you how the entire flow makes it into something extremely realistic. And now as a learner, I know for sure, like if saying, wait your turn, that's really crappy. And you can, you know, I made him look a little upset or whatever. But in any case, it just, if you do that with every learning objective that is applicable for a realistic scenario, you're going to have an outcome of super realistic scenarios that are going to resonate with the learners. Any questions? It was a lot that we went through, but any questions about the process, the scenario mapping document itself? I'll bring up the final one. Bridget, go ahead.
What were you using there for storyboard?
For the storyboard, for this one, this thing that I just showed you was the final course, and it was developed in Storyline. Yeah. Any other questions about the floor-based questions, or like I said, sometimes question 1 is optional. So in this, when we're looking at what this here, you'll notice that there's only 3 questions, and it's because I created this myself, and I already had context into where and when for this one. Like for this learning objective, I already know where and when to host a mindful morning. So I skipped question 1. And as we will remember, sometimes we don't need to ask question 1 because we've been provided the information about who the people in the scenario are, or you know what maybe they've given us imagery they're using or whatever. Sometimes it's just what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, and then what are the consequences. So again, you just may not always use question 1. Any other questions?
Patti, can I speak?
Please speak.
I don't know whether my question is relevant, because what I do is another kind of work. I just make material for students in general, not training like companies or things of this kind. And
Okay.
My question is, if this kind of thing that you're doing, which is great, could be useful or could be used in my case, like when I prepare a course, for example, be it geography or whatever, English or mathematics. I mean, would this apply to my job, to my thing, to the thing I do?
That's a great question. Do you typically create scenarios like, you know, like if you're doing a course on, you know, geography?
Yeah, sure, I sure do. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Like, do you have an example top of mind that you can think of that it doesn't have to be geography, but some type of scenario that you've created?
For example, when you expect a student to give a certain kind of answer, and based on the topic you just mentioned, and the guy, I mean, does it wrong. I mean, I'm not sure, but I think that it could be used somehow, because, you know, I've never had any kind of training or any kind of, I mean, I do it all by myself. I've been doing this for a long time, but all by myself. It's the first time I really have contact with an expert like you and people like the guys that are attending to your conference. And for me, it sounds fantastic, but at the same time, I'm scared because I think I don't know anything. I'm just, I don't know. And
no, I think
I wish I could learn more.
Well, I mean, you're here, and that's incredible. Wait a second. Let's see, Bridget, did you have something? I only saw the side of your face.
I was just going to say to to Alexandra, do you tell stories when you're teaching your students?
Yeah, sure. I sure do. Yeah.
Okay, this is a slightly different way of telling the story. It's breaking it down into learning objectives and what are the consequences, right? So it's breaking apart the morals of the story in a way. If you do this, this will happen. If you do that, that will happen. If you do that, that might happen.
Yeah,
So
this is fantastic. I had never thought that way. I mean,
so you're probably already doing it, but
yeah, maybe somehow.
For online learning.
Well, that's how I felt. I didn't know how either, Alexandra, and I'm the one that figured, and then I wrote it down. Sometimes, like Bridget said, you do things intuitively and you don't realize what the methodology is, but you are doing it. And that is true, even of me, to sit down and think about, well, how did I do this? So, I don't know, I'm thinking, I'm not super familiar with your content because I do mostly corporate, but I do think that absolutely, if you tell stories, like geography, this is just a top of my head, if we're going on a trip somewhere. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're
because
fine.
I'm presently working or trying to develop a work based on philosophy for children. Okay, and I think that it might apply, perfectly. I don't know.
Yeah, if there is a right action that if you're telling a story and you stop it, sometimes we tell the whole story. And so maybe what it is you're just stopping it right when there's a decision point. It's really about decision points.
Yeah, sure.
What should you do here? And then thinking about, well, what if they do, how could they do this wrong? And then what would happen if they do it wrong? And that's really it. You're just taking your story and putting the decision point in there.
It's like causes and consequences somehow.
It is, yes. So just think of any story that you are writing and where is the decision point, and just stop it right there before you tell them the answer and let them guess. Sometimes it's even better if they don't know the answer and let them guess, because they can see, that's a really great way of learning, and, make it low pressure. Sometimes I'll say, take a guess. What should you do? No idea. Just making it feel like they don't have to know the right answer. It's okay, but just give it a try, see what happens, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. It's been
Patti,
enlightening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Patti?
Yeah, Elizabeth.
I was going to say, Alexandra, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I used to do instructional design work in the K through 12 space for an online virtual K through 12 school. And we followed these very similar practices when we designed the framework for a course. And so, for example, I designed a 7th grade math course, all taught online, but the course in and of itself had sort of this theme and story that it followed, because we really wanted to, go beyond the content of Common Core and really give students more of an immersive learning experience where they had to make decisions and experience consequences as they followed like a character on a journey. So this kind of stuff absolutely applies to maybe the context that you're thinking of. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, sure does. Thank you very much.
And also, Alexandra, I also wanted to mention that if you have a example of a story and you're not sure how to apply this to it, I don't know if you're on Slack. If you're not, let me know. I'm happy to invite you. If you post it on Slack, I'm happy to break it down for you and give you a push in the right direction if that's helpful or if it's necessary. So just wanted to throw it out there.
As a matter of fact, I'm I don't know if it's the right word. It's like a newbie. I don't know anything. What I've been doing is I've been using like Storyline for many years now, and I've learned everything all by myself. So for me, everything is new. What it's telling me is new. Everything these people are doing and saying to me now is new. And wow, it would help me a lot if we could get some hints on or some suggestions what things I might do in order to I mean get more knowledge.
Yeah. So if you post on Slack, like here's a topic and a little bit of content about it, like if you could just, you know, give a little bit of information on the Slack platform, then I am happy to kind of help push you in you know, in a direction that this might apply. So just that's an offer, and I'm happy to do that. I'm not familiar with like what the content might be like, so that's why I would need a little bit of context. The scenario, the question one, that's what I need from you is give me a little bit of the context, and we can kind of see what we can come up with on there.
Okay. What would it be now?
Yeah.
Oh.
And
the context. Well, I've been developing now. It's a course, as I said. I mean, for children. Okay.
Yes.
Where they would have like philosophy as a basis, and they would, I mean, learn or try to learn because I have help of other professionals, and like English and Portuguese at the same time because we're in Brazil now.
Yeah. Yeah, so so that's a broad topic, and what we would have to do is break it down to a single objective, a single learning objective. So one thing, and we're running out of time here, but maybe if you, I know you said you've kind of written stories. They are probably tied to some learning objective, these stories.
Sure.
I'm sure they're teaching something, whether you've done that intentionally or not. That's kind of just, like I said, we oftentimes intuitively do it. So maybe put one of the stories up, and I can kind of on Slack, and I can help you kind of think through how to turn it into a scenario where they're involved. Okay. And then just so as a reminder for everyone, I'm going to upload these slides onto our Slack channel, so that way you can download them if you want and run through them, and it has the 4 base questions and all the examples. And then I'll also put a scenario mapping document up in case you just want to download that. And like I said, you may want to take that learning objective column out before sending it to a SME. Depends on what kind of SME you're working with. They may start trying to change that. Anyway, I usually do, but it's helpful to see when you're filling it out so that you're tying it to something. Thanks everyone for listening to me ramble on about scenarios. If you want to take a look at the course that I showed you today, that I created the scenario mapping document and then created a course out of it, that's on learningreinvented.net under my portfolio. It's also on mindfulmornings.org under 4 groups. So you can go through that. There's no password or anything. Thanks so much. We're at the top of the hour. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see everybody at the first Thursday of next month, which is, wow, like December. I can't even believe it. So
thank you, Patti.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving.